when the salesperson becomes better. When you go to work on yourself and concentrate on becoming a better person through study and practice and reflection, every part of your human relationships will improve as well. You can make yourself into a superior human being simply by using all of your relationships and interactions with others as opportunities to live out the most important qualities you want to develop in yourself. You can become any kind of person you want if you are patient enough and if you persist long enough. The Gallup organization completed an extensive survey on 1,500 successful Americans some years ago, in which they asked them how they accounted for their great achievements. The reason given by most of them was that they felt that they had higher than average levels of common sense. They defined common sense as the ability to have experiences and to learn from those experiences and to apply what they had learned to subsequent experiences. As a result, they said, they'd become progressively better and eventually leaders in their chosen fields. Common sense was also defined by the people in the study as the ability to cut through the clutter and to see the world as it really was. They felt that they had a far more honest and objective appraisal of reality than the average person did. They didn't fool themselves or delude themselves into wishing and hoping and seeing things that simply weren't there. They didn't ignore the hard facts of life, but rather they incorporated these truths into their worldviews and made their decisions and actions based upon them. Robert Ringer, in his book $1 Million Habits, refers to this as the reality habit. In an earlier session, I called it the law of reality. Jack Welch, the president of General Electric Corporation, a $17 billion conglomerate, says that it's the most important single principle for success in leadership. He also says that in order for you to succeed in any undertaking, you must be willing to see the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Robert Ringer said, "The most successful men and women in America are those who take the time to really understand the facts of the situation and then to act upon them without pretending they don't exist or hoping that they'll go away." One of the finest books written on this entire subject of reality was entitled The Way the World Works by Jude Wanniski, a writer with the Wall Street Journal at the time, and a man who spent many years studying economics in America and around the world before concluding that there were certain immutable laws and principles that repeated themselves over and over again throughout all of human history. Each one of these thinkers and thousands of others have come to virtually the same conclusions about the way that people behave, and their suggestions are all the same. To be successful, you must conform your life and behaviors to the way the world really is, and to the way that people really behave, not the way they should behave. Even Abraham Maslow, the great psychologist, said, "The ability to be absolutely honest and objective about life and other people is the mark of the fully mature, self-actualizing human being." In this session, I'm going to talk about the laws of economics. But before you roll your eyes and begin thinking that this is a dry and boring subject, I want to point out that economic behavior is simply the study of human psychology and human action. It's the study of how and why individuals behave as they do, and how the behaviors of large numbers of these individuals, all motivated the same way, create the economic conditions and possibilities that you see around you every day. In its simplest sense, you must know and understand the laws of economics if you wish to achieve financial success in our competitive enterprise economy. The starting point of learning how to make and keep more money is to thoroughly familiarize yourself with the entire subject so that you can anticipate opportunities and avoid economic reversals. An understanding of these laws and principles can give you the winning edge that can enable you to move ahead further and faster than anyone around you. More than anything else, it'll give you a heightened sense of coherence in that you will understand the major events of your world in a way that would escape you if you weren't familiar with these laws. Now, economic laws are merely expressions of human behavior. Just as we said that happiness comes from the satisfaction of needs and that true happiness arises when you reach the point where you're completely content, we know that all human beings, because of an identical psychological structure, act in certain ways under virtually all circumstances to achieve certain goals. These laws and principles apply to men and women, young and old, educated and uneducated, and they cross all the lines of race, culture, and national origin. They explain many things that otherwise might seem inexplicable. The study of these categories of human action takes us deep into the realms of behavioral and cognitive psychology. They explain the price of apples at your local supermarket, as well as the budget deficits of billions of dollars. These laws are so clear, so powerful, and so flexible that you can use them to more accurately interpret your world than perhaps you ever believed possible. I began studying economics myself in 1972. I sent away for books on the subject, and my first readings in economics began with a 900-page textbook. For the next few years, I dedicated hundreds and thousands of hours to reading, studying, writing, and speaking on the subjects of money, prices, labor, political economy, inflation, entrepreneurship, free enterprise, national and international trade, and a variety of other subjects. I lectured and spoke to thousands of people all over the country. Some of my talks were audio-taped and transcribed and then reproduced in the thousands. Some of my talks were put on video and then played and replayed on television, where they were seen by many tens of thousands of people. My success in economics, if you want to call it that, has come about because I learned how to cut through the fog of confusion around economic theory and make it both interesting and enjoyable to the average person. More than anything else, people who fully grasped these simple concepts made profound changes in their thinking and behavior that led them on to far higher levels of success and satisfaction in their work and personal lives. The first law of economics can be called the law of ambition. In its simplest terms, it says that every act you engage in is an attempt to improve your conditions in some way. Human beings are goal-driven organisms, and they're always driven toward achieving more of something, although that something may change even from minute to minute. From infancy to old age, you are ambitious. You want to improve your life or some part of your life in some way. If you're earning a certain amount of money, you want to earn more. If you have a certain level of physical health, you want to be even healthier. If you have one home or apartment, you want a larger one. And if you have a larger one, you want a second one somewhere else. If you have a car, you want a larger car. It's normal and natural and completely human for every single person to continually strive to get more and better and faster and newer and cheaper of everything and anything they can think of. The only limitations on human ambition are the limitations imposed either internally by the limitations you place on your own mind, or externally by the limitations imposed upon you by law and society. In the Soviet Union today, we see that 74 years of attempting to create a new type of human being, one who would not be motivated by ambition, has been a total failure. The minute that people saw it was once more possible to fulfill their ambitions, to improve their conditions, there was an outpouring of energy and enthusiasm that swept away the Communist Party so rapidly and abruptly that the whole world stood in wonder. But there's no wonder. It is merely the acting out of individual ambition on a large scale. This brings us to another version of what we call the ABC theory of human behavior. It says that for you to take action, three things are necessary. First, you must be dissatisfied with your existing condition. That's A. Second, you must be aware of a greater satisfaction toward which you can move, and that's C. And third, you must believe that there exists a way, B, for you, by acting, to get from where you are to where you want to go. To restate this, it says that first, in order for you to take action, there must be a state of felt dissatisfaction. You must be unhappy with your current situation. You must want to improve things in some way. The C in this ABC formula is your perception of a greater state of satisfaction. There must be something that you want to have, or a condition that you feel that you can move to that will alleviate your feeling of dissatisfaction, like sitting on a tack and jumping off. The B is your perception of something that you can do, a step that you can take that will get you from A to C. A very simple example would be if you were driving an older car and you saw one of your coworkers driving a brand new car. This could cause you to be dissatisfied with your old car and simultaneously cause you to see that owning a newer car would alleviate this dissatisfaction. It would improve your condition. The A and the C of the ABC formula now exists. The B could be your conclusion that if you worked a little harder and earned a little more money, you'd be able to afford to purchase that newer car. Your heightened level of ambition could then drive you toward a more intense effort that would lead you ultimately to the satisfaction of this particular need. The reverse of this is that where you are dissatisfied and see a state of greater satisfaction, but you don't see how any action of yours will get you there, you'll refrain from acting at all. For example, you may be driving an old car and you're passed on the road by someone driving a $100,000 Rolls-Royce Corniche. You may fantasize and think about how nice it would be to drive such a lovely car, but you can't even begin to imagine earning the kind of money that would enable you to pay $100,000 for a car like that. Therefore, the sight of the Rolls-Royce would not motivate you to take an action of any kind. The A and the C exist, but the B does not. The real difference in levels of ambition is really the difference that exists in levels of desire and belief. If you really believe that you can move from wherever you are to wherever you want to go, you'll be continually compelled to take action to move yourself from A, your state of dissatisfaction, to C, your state of greater satisfaction. This is the difference between learned helplessness and learned optimism. The great majority of people have pretty much the same abilities and talents as have the most successful members in our society. But this majority believes that there's very little that they can do that will enable them to fulfill their ambitions. They feel helpless and powerless. They therefore continue to do what they're doing. Rather than increasing their abilities to accomplish their goals, they merely decrease their wants and desires so that they can be satisfied at a far lower level of accomplishment. The final statement on the law of ambition says that if you're completely contented or if you feel completely helpless, you'll refrain from acting to improve your condition. The only reason that a person does not act to continually improve himself in some way is because he's reached the state of contentment where he feels that no further improvement is either necessary or desirable, or he's reached the state of hopelessness where he doesn't think anything he does will make much of a difference. The danger is that sometimes these are conscious assumptions that you've arrived at by thinking and reasoning, and sometimes these are unconscious assumptions, conclusions that you've arrived at without even realizing that these conclusions have allowed you to go down a mental blind alley. The second law of economics is called the law of minimum effort. It says that you always seek to get the things you want with the least possible expenditure of effort. Because you value your time and your money, your mental and physical energy and your resources, you do everything possible to conserve them. You use your energies sparingly and you spend them as carefully as possible to get the things you want. When we say that we are economic beings, we merely mean that we are economical in our choices. We don't spend more than we have to achieve a particular satisfaction. The first part of the law of minimum effort then says, you cannot consciously choose a harder way to accomplish something if an easier way is available to you to accomplish the same result. You are structured psychologically in such a way that you can't force yourself to select a more difficult path to your goal if you can see an easier path, all things being equal. And everyone is the same way. Even animals are the same way. If you look at a pasture, you'll find that cattle always follow the easiest path to get from one part of the pasture to another. and each subsequent cow follows the same path, wearing a groove in the field, or what we call a cow path. You also have similar grooves worn in your brain, habitual ways of acting which you engage in automatically and unthinkingly because you've simply accepted that this is the easiest way for you to get from one point to another. The second part of this law of minimum effort says that all human beings are inherently lazy in that they follow the path of least resistance in all things. Laziness, then, is normal and natural and inherent in all human action. The lazy tendency in human beings has led to every great advance and breakthrough in the world of human science and technology. Every single forward advance has to be labor-saving in order to be successful. The most affluent countries and the most affluent companies are those who produce the highest quality of goods and services with the minimum possible effort or expenditure of resources. The word lazy is neither positive nor negative. It's not a value judgment. It's only as you demonstrate this quality that it takes on the value of being either good or bad. For example, if you manifest your laziness by continually seeking faster and more efficient ways to get the things you want, it's a good quality. However, if a person manifests their laziness by sitting around on a couch watching television, it's a bad quality. What is the ultimate measure of whether a quality is good or bad? Well, it's simply whether or not the practice of that quality leads to the improvement of the individual's life in the most economical way. If what you do is life-enhancing and life-enriching, and you're lazy in doing it, you're using this natural human quality of laziness in its highest and best sense. The third law of economics is the law of maximization. It says that you always seek to obtain the highest possible return for your expenditure of time, money, or resources. Again, this is just a simple and obvious explanation of human behavior under almost all circumstances. However, it's an extraordinarily important law to be aware of to enable you to avoid confusion in interpreting and understanding the behaviors of other people. The first part of the law of maximization says that when given a choice between more and less, all things being equal, you will always choose more in order to maximize your situation. The second part of this law says that the desire for more is automatic and instinctive and applies to all human desires and fulfillments. In other words, if you're selling something and one person offers you $5 and another person offers you $6, if you're behaving normally, you'll choose to accept the $6 rather than the $5. You will always choose more rather than less. In order for you to accept a lesser amount rather than a greater amount, some other higher value must be at work to determine your behavior. For example, it often happens that when a company is put up for sale, the owners of the company will accept a lower price from one group of investors because that group of investors will promise to protect the jobs and the livelihood of the employees, while the other group of investors offering a higher price will not. But if all things were equal, the amount you will demand from the exchange of your time or money or resources will always be the very most that you can get for the very least that you can give. This desire for more just says that you are inherently greedy, as is everyone else, and greed is neither positive nor negative. It's just a fact. The word greed has been used in politics and economics and religion to describe the behaviors of other people, when in reality it has no value attached to it at all. Every single person is greedy in that they prefer more to less. They are simply greedy for different things. Even Mother Teresa, one of the great humanitarians living today, is greedy in that she has an intense desire to serve the greatest number of people that she possibly can through her Sisters of Charity mission. Parents are greedy for their children in that they want the very best for them in life. Athletes are greedy in that they want to achieve the very most in their areas of competition and be paid the very most for doing it. Everyone is greedy. Now, some commentators have taken to calling the 1980s the decade of greed. This is really a silly and meaningless term with a hidden agenda and usually ulterior motives. The fact is that during the 1980s, which has also been called the decade of entrepreneurship, more people seized the opportunity to improve their conditions and to get more in the very fastest and easiest way possible than perhaps had ever happened in any prior period of economic history. More than 20 million new jobs were created, and almost the entirety of American business and industry was reorganized for greater efficiency, effectiveness, and profitability. The only real limitation on people behaving in what is called a greedy manner is the ABC formula. As I stated before, everyone is greedy. Everyone seeks ways to satisfy their greed. The only thing that blocks human action in that direction is that most people don't see how they can get from where they are to where they want to go. But as soon as a person sees a way of achieving his goals and desires, he takes action. When someone calls this an act of greed, preferring more to less, they are simply declaring to others that they don't understand or they don't agree with what's going on. The fourth law of economics is the law of time preference. This law says that because your time is your life and you value your life, you always prefer earlier rather than later in the satisfaction of any desire. To put it another way, people prefer immediate gratification to delayed gratification, and they must be rewarded, sometimes substantially, to put off gratification at all. The first part of this law is that when given the choice between a reward today or the identical reward at some future time, in the absence of extenuating circumstances, you'll prefer to take the reward now rather than later. If someone says to you, "I'll give you $1,000 today," or "I'll give you $1,000 in 6 months," all things being equal, when would you prefer to have the $1,000? The answer is obvious. If you have the choice, you'll take it now rather than later. Why? It's worth more now because you can enjoy what that $1,000 can mean to you earlier rather than later. Because of the law of time preference, you need to be rewarded for delaying gratification. You need to be compensated in some way to a greater degree in the future if you're willing to put off enjoying the reward today. For example, interest rates are merely rewards for delaying the expenditure of money today into some future period. If you could spend $1 today or spend $1 in 1 year, in order for you to wait for 1 year, you will want to be rewarded with even greater spending power or power to buy yourself the satisfactions you desire a year from today. All interest rates are merely rewards for waiting. Over all of recorded economic history, the average interest rate required for a person to wait is about 3 to 4% per year. But when interest rates are higher than 3%, the extra amount reflects the inflation that might take place, the taxes that might be taken off the interest payment, and the degree of risk involved in getting your money back at all. If any one of those three factors, or more than one of those factors, is high, the amount of interest that you will require to delay gratification from the present to the future will be higher still. This is why in some countries with high inflation rates, it's quite common for them to offer interest rates of 20% and 30% and even 40% per month. These are merely rewards for delaying gratification and are based on the law of time preference. The second part of this law simply says that you are inherently impatient in the achievement of your goals, and this tendency toward impatience is neither good nor bad. Because you value your life, you value your time and the various pleasures and gratifications there are for you to enjoy with that time. For this reason, you are always more eager to enjoy these satisfactions now as opposed to waiting. You are naturally impatient in that whatever you want it immediately. It takes self-mastery, self-control, and self-discipline to restrain your appetites and delay gratification to a later period because it may be much better and more rewarding to do so. In children, for example, who lack these developed qualities of constraint, you'll see a very high degree of impatience. They want everything immediately. It's been said that today even immediate gratification is not fast enough. The fifth law of economics is the law of vanity, as applied to economics. It says that you are egotistical and self-centered, and you place a high value on your appearance, your opinions, your choices, your relationships, and the way you're treated by others. This law says that each person is ego-centered and vain. Each person is extremely concerned about how he or she is perceived by others, and much of your personality is determined by the way you think others see you and think about you. The fact of vanity and the role of the ego in human behavior is not even open to question. The entire fashion industry, automotive industry, jewelry industry, furniture industry, clothing industry, and many other industries are all built around appealing to the individual's desire to look good to others. In fact, many of the great fortunes in America have been based on finding a unique and original appeal to vanity with a product or service that can be sold to large numbers of people. The sixth law of economics is the law of ignorance, which says that every act you engage in is characterized by a certain degree of uncertainty with regard to the outcome, because you can never know everything there is to know about anything. This law simply says that we're all ignorant to a certain degree and that no one can know everything there is to know about even the smallest subject. Because we're ignorant, we can't predict with exact certainty what's likely to happen. We don't even know for sure whether we'll drive to and from work on a given day without getting into an accident. There are laws of statistics and laws of probability that show if we do certain things like following the traffic laws carefully and wearing seat belts and driving at a particular distance behind another car, we can improve the odds of our arriving at home or work safely, but there's still no certainty. Ignorance is everywhere and all around us. Everyone is ignorant. Most people are incredibly ignorant of an enormous number of subjects, just like you and me. In fact, our areas of knowledge are very small compared to our areas of ignorance. This is why anyone who purports to predict how economic events are going to turn out is really engaging in a form of guesswork. No one can know because of the uncertainty principle. Someone once said, nature is always on the side of the hidden flaw. One of Murphy's laws is that whatever can possibly go wrong will go wrong. Unpredictability and uncertainty lead inevitably to the fact that we are all ignorant to a greater or lesser degree. The seventh law of economics, and perhaps the most important law in understanding economics, is what I call the law of expediency. It says that people always strive to get the things they want the fastest and easiest way possible without regard to the secondary consequences of their actions. The first part of the law of expediency says that people are naturally and normally lazy, greedy, ambitious, vain, ignorant, and impatient. This is the way people are in a state of nature, and it's neither good nor bad. It's simply a fact. You are lazy, you are greedy, you are ambitious, you are vain, you are ignorant, and you are impatient. And so is everybody else. It's been said that we live in an imperfect world because it is full of imperfect human beings. The second part of the law of expediency says that people strive to achieve security, comfort, leisure, love, respect, and fulfillment in the fastest and easiest ways possible. Each person has a multiplicity of needs and desires, urges and instincts, hopes and dreams, and each person is motivated to achieve satisfaction in these areas by seeking out the fastest and easiest possible way to do so, tempered by the fact that they're also vain, ignorant, and impatient in everything they do. The law of expediency explains the way the world works. It's often called the path of least resistance. It explains why things go wrong and why people behave the way they do. Everyone in the world is driven in every conceivable way to seek the fastest and easiest way to get the things they want right now without concern for the long-term consequences of their actions. The third part of this law says that government programs usually fail because they're administered by people who are motivated primarily by the law of expediency. Whenever anyone says, in response to any social problem, the government should do this or that, what they're saying is that average people, predominantly motivated by the personal instincts of laziness, greediness, ambition, selfishness, vanity, ignorance, and impatience, should be put in charge of bringing about a socially desirable result. As the author Charles Murray illustrated in his best-selling book, Losing Ground, virtually every government program aimed at achieving some result not only fails, but tends to bring about a result opposite to that intended in the first place. Perhaps the greatest single threat to freedom and opportunity for you and I is the unrestricted growth of government taxation and government regulation. The reason all of these attempts, albeit noble and praiseworthy, fail is because they must be carried out by normal human beings with normal human drives and motivations. The eighth law of economics is the law of duality, which says that there are always two reasons given for doing anything. There is the reason that sounds good, and there is the real reason. The reason that people give for doing just about anything is the reason that sounds the most socially acceptable and uplifting. The real reason that anyone does anything, with few exceptions, is because the individual perceives that this is the fastest and easiest way to get the things he wants right now. The first part of the law of duality says that people always give the socially acceptable reason for whatever they do. We call this rationalization. Rationalization simply means to put a socially favorable interpretation upon what might be an otherwise socially unacceptable act. Dr. James Buchanan of the University of Chicago won the Nobel Prize recently for his breakthrough work in economics in what he called public choice theory. He demonstrated that because of this law of expediency, you can very accurately predict how a politician will behave under any given set of circumstances. He showed that a politician wants, more than anything else, to be reelected. If a politician is running for office, the politician's dominant desire is to be elected in the first place. The principle remains the same. What Dr. Buchanan found was that you can predict how a person will vote by studying public opinion polls in the politician's constituency and finding out how many people support a particular policy. The politician of whatever party will always vote, irrespective of any principle, philosophical, moral, or otherwise, for the policy that he or she feels will garner the greatest number of votes in the next election. Dr. Milton Friedman, who also won a Nobel Prize in economics, once said that the validity of an economic principle can be measured by its ability to predict future events. In other words, if a law or a principle is true, you can make predictions based on it, and those predictions will largely turn out to be correct. Dr. Buchanan received his Nobel Prize because in democratic politics the law of expediency was extremely accurate in showing how a politician would vote. This, by the way, is not the sort of discovery that is meant to encourage the average voter, and is probably the reason why one of the best-selling books in America today is entitled Why Americans Hate Politics. The ninth law of economics is the law of secondary consequences, which follows from the law of expediency. It says that for everything you do, there will be a direct consequence, and there will be indirect or secondary consequences. The first part of this law says that the consideration of secondary consequences is the hallmark of wisdom. Your ability to look down the road like a chess player looking down the board and anticipate what might happen as the result of what you do, and then to take those possible consequences into consideration before you act initially, is the hallmark of the superior thinker. The second part of the law of secondary consequences says that the ignorance of secondary consequences is the hallmark of stupidity and the primary cause of failure. We said in an earlier session that errant assumptions lie at the root of every setback. Action without thinking seems to precede every failure. In each case, we're saying that the unwillingness or the inability to consider the secondary consequences of a particular action are what lead to failure. The initial reason for doing everything always seems positive and leads to short-term pleasure or gratification. However, the long-term consequences may lead to far greater pain and suffering than could have been imagined or anticipated. There's a very simple expression that tends to explain success and failure in adult life. It is short-term pain for long-term gain. It simply means that if you discipline yourself and sacrifice in the short term through hard work, through dedicated application and saving of your money, the long-term rewards can be substantial for you. The flip side of this equation is short-term gain for long-term pain. It says that if you choose to have a good time all the time in the present, the long-term consequences can and will be very painful and difficult for you. This law explains much unhappiness in our society today. The 10th law of economics is the law of unintended consequences, which says that the ultimate consequences of many actions are far worse than if nothing had been done in the first place. For example, politics today is a minefield of unintended consequences coming home to roost. Many people who passed laws many years ago felt that even though in the long term they might be disastrous, in the short term these laws would get them the votes and support they required to satisfy their most pressing needs to be reelected immediately. For example, we know today that if you increase the amount of money that you give to people for not working or for living on welfare, you'll create a market demand for more of these people. They'll behave economically. Because of the law of expediency, more and more people will seek out government handouts rather than working for a living. If you reward unemployment, welfare, crime, and other social problems with government money, you'll inevitably get more of them. If you, at the same time, punish investment, savings, hard work, and productive effort through extensive regulation and taxes, you'll get less of them. The unintended consequences of the laws meant to help in these areas can be far worse than if nothing were done at all. The second part of the law of unintended consequences is obvious. It says, negative unintended consequences always occur when any action depends for its success on violating the law of expediency. If any law or regulation depends for its success on people overcoming their natural urges to be lazy, greedy, ambitious, selfish, vain, ignorant, and impatient, that law or regulation is destined to fail. You cannot change human nature. You can only organize your society in such a way that men and women, eager to improve their lives and following the basic drives of their personalities, will have no choice but to act in ways that are productive and constructive for the entire society. This is called free enterprise. The 11th law, as it applies to economics, is the law of choice, which says that every human action is a choice, and the choice is always based on the dominant values of the individual at that moment. You are a choosing organism. You are continually making choices based on what you consider more important and what you consider less important. Every act that you engage in implies a choice of some kind. You can tell exactly who you are and what you believe and what's important to you by simply looking at the choices that you make minute by minute, hour by hour, and day by day. The first part of the law of choice says that your values are always expressed in your actions. As we said before, you always demonstrate what you truly believe and what you truly value by the actions you take. It's not what you say or wish or hope or intend, but only what you do that is the true indicator of what you really believe and value in life. The second part of this law says that you always choose what you most value at the moment. This means that at any given time, when you're forced to choose among a variety of options, you'll always choose what you value the most. When you're walking down the line at a dinner buffet, the items that you put on your plate will be an exact reflection of the foods that you most value and desire at that particular moment. The third part of the law of choice says that every action you take or every action you decline to take implies a choice and a statement about your values and beliefs. Now here's an important point. Both actions and inactions have consequences. Whenever an action or an inaction, a decision by you to do something or a decision by you to refrain from doing something, has a consequence, it is by definition an action, and it's based on a value. For example, if you get up in the morning and you read a book that can help you in some way, you're demonstrating a very different set of values than if you get up in the morning and watch television and read the newspaper. If you exercise physically to keep yourself in top condition rather than sitting around talking at lunchtime or after work, you're demonstrating a very different set of values from a person who doesn't exercise. If you read and study or spend time interacting and communicating with your family in the evenings, rather than watching television or socializing, you're demonstrating to yourself and to others that you have a particular set of values. In every case, it's what you choose to do with your time and your life and what you choose not to do that determines your future. The 12th law of economics is the law of the excluded alternative. It says that whatever you choose to do, you are simultaneously rejecting or excluding all other choices at that moment. When you decide to get married to a particular person, you are discriminating in the sense that you are simultaneously rejecting the possibility of marrying any other person in the world. When you go out at night or get involved in a relationship with another person, you are excluding all other possibilities at that moment. The first part of this law says that every choice implies a rejection of all other choices. Now this is important. Some people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But since you can only choose one thing at a time, every choice that you make simultaneously implies rejection of all other choices. When you purchase a particular item with your limited amount of money, you are simultaneously rejecting all other items that are for sale at that moment. You're expressing your highest value with your choice. The second part of the law of the excluded alternative simply says that every choice that you make tells what you truly believe and value. So give your choices careful thought, and give your values careful thought as well. Out of them come all the great issues of life. This brings us to the 13th law of economics, one of the great breakthroughs of economic history, the work of Dr. Karl Menger of Austria in the middle of the last century. He was the first person to postulate what has come to be called the subjective theory of value. This law says that the value of any good or service is completely personal. It is determined by what a person is willing to pay for it. What this law states is that there are no inherent values in anything. Value is always subjective. People always choose what they feel will make them the happiest or what will relieve their dissatisfaction the most at any given moment. No one can choose for another. No one can tell another person whether or not something has a particular value. All value is personal and subjective. For example, it's silly for a government to try and place a specific value on any good or service or wage. Only the person who's being asked to pay for the good or service or to pay a certain wage is in a position to determine what it's worth to him. When people say that something should be worth a particular amount, they don't realize that the word should is meaningless in economics. It is merely the expression of an opinion, and the opinion usually means that I think that someone else should be made to pay this amount. But in a free society, a mandated or dictated price or wage has very little bearing on the real value of the item. For example, when certain labor unions used their power to strike and shut down large industries in order to force the companies into paying them more money for the same or less work, they achieved short-term gain for long-term pain. Because no one can arbitrarily decide upon a wage, if the wage gets too high, the companies simply move their factories and their manufacturing to other states or countries where the wages are not as high. If they can't move their factories, they simply shut down. So the people who initially received the huge wage gains will soon find themselves out of work, and sometimes for life. Any attempt to violate an economic law, whether it's the law of expediency or the law of subjective value, always leads to consequences that are far worse in the long run than if the attempt hadn't been made in the first place. The first part of the law of subjective value simply says that all prices are educated guesses about how much people will pay to consume the entire supply produced. The second part of the law says that all sales at reduced prices of merchandise or services are admissions by the company or the vendors that the initial asking price was too high. And the third part of the law of subjective value says only the person being asked to pay is in a position to determine what something is worth. All wages and prices are established arbitrarily, at least initially. But it's only what the customers are willing to pay in the marketplace that determines whether those wages and prices will hold up. If the wages or prices are too high, people will be laid off or prices will be reduced. The market and the customer in the marketplace will ultimately decide how much will be paid for everything. The 14th law is the law of marginality. It's a central law of economics which says that it's what the last customer will pay for the last item that determines the price of the whole supply. In other words, it's not the customer who has the greatest need and the greatest financial resources who determines how that item will be priced in a competitive market. It's the last customer who can choose between buying that item, buying another item, or buying no item at all, who will set the final price. Companies such as McDonald's and Burger King and Pizza Hut are brilliant at determining what the real price for the marginal customer should be. That's why when they close their doors at night, they've sold virtually everything that they've produced that day. The first part of the law of marginality says that the market clearing price is the price at which all customers will satisfy their needs and all sellers will sell all their products and services. The market clearing price is the essence of both micro and macroeconomics. It's the core of understanding all economic activity. It's the price at which the demand and the supply meet in perfect equality. The market clearing price is the amount at which all items for sale can be sold and which everyone who wants to purchase an item and is willing to pay a particular amount of money can be satisfied. If the market clearing price is too low, there will still be customers with money who want to buy the product, but there won't be enough of it. If the market clearing price is too high, there will still be items for sale, but customers will be unable or unwilling to purchase them. The second part of the law of marginality says that it is the behavior of people on the margin that determines all economic activity. For example, it's not the tax rate in general, but it's the marginal tax rate that determines savings, investment, and productive activity. It's the amount that a person is charged on each additional dollar of income that determines whether or not he or she will make the additional efforts necessary to earn that income. When tax rates go up too high, people simply stop working. The additional dollar of income after taxes is not worth giving up the enjoyment of leisure time and entertainment and other forms of immediate gratification that are the alternative. The 15th law is the law of economic substitution, which says that whenever a good or service increases in price, customers seek out substitutes that will yield them the same satisfaction at lower prices. Whenever a good or service or a quantity of labor becomes too expensive, customers begin to seek out lower price substitutes and companies emerge in the marketplace